Everyone, happy Tuesday. I hope you're having a great start to your week so far. We have a lot going on here at Sulky as usual. We are headed to QuiltCon, so that's exciting. I have not been to an in-person event where I will actually be in close proximity with maybe some of you in so long. So it's very exciting. We are sponsoring the Handwork Lounge at QuiltCon. And so it's very fitting that today I bring you a handwork project. I'm also going to show you how to create it using your embroidery machine. So if machine embroidery is more your style, we're going to go over those how-tos as well. Before I get started with today's project, though, I want to make sure that everyone knows about our In the Hoop greeting card sewing session. This sewing session is at sewingonline.sulky.com, and it will be active on March 8th. So on March 8th, you will have all access to all parts of this session, including 6 greeting card design files, as well as 5 bonus designs from our friends at Designs by Juju. Julie Trieb of Designs by Juju is heading up this whole session, so you will be getting education from the digitizer and designer herself. So, when are you ever going to get that opportunity? I don't know. Here with Sulky, I guess. So head on over to sewingonline.sulky.com. You can purchase this embroidery sewing session. It's called In the Hoop greeting cards. And for your purchase, not only do you get all of those great design files, but you will get tons of video instruction from Julie. It's all on demand, so you can watch all of the videos all at once. You can schedule out your sewing time and watch one day and one the next whenever you have time to sit down and sew and watch. You can be right at your embroidery machine while you're watching the videos with the same design files that Julie is using. So it's a really cool opportunity to learn from Julie herself and join us for this great sewing session. All right, so that's March 8th. So if you purchase today, you won't have access to the session until March 8th. Just to be clear, it's not a live event like we usually do. It's a more in-depth session, we like to call them. So there's lots of components and parts and lessons within the session. So I think you're all going to really, really enjoy it. All right. Also, before we get started, we are having an awesome sale right now because we are still in the middle of National Embroidery Month. So today we are offering 25% off of the Sulky 12-weight cotton petites thread. That's what I'm going to be showing you first off. And this is our project actually, this Bloom mini quilt. So this mini quilt you're seeing here is all embroidered by hand, and the Bloom lettering is all done with applique. So fusible applique. And then you can add some hand stitches to further tack that in place, and a super cute design to celebrate the coming of spring. I don't know about you, but spring in Colorado, anything goes. We could have snow, sunshine, rain. You just never, ever know. So it would be nice to, create a quilt that celebrates the promise of blooming and blossoming and growing. Also on sale right now is the Sulky Stick and Stitch. This is our printable water-soluble stabilizer sheets. So once you grab your free Bloom mini quilt pattern, it's on the site for free right now. So with that pattern, you will get instructions for the mini quilt. So the little bit of piecing and quilting that goes on. You will also get those hand embroidery templates and the Bloom applique templates. So you'll want to grab up some stick and stitch so that you can print your hand embroidery templates right on the fabric-like side of the stabilizer. And then you stick that to your fabric right side, and that's how you transfer your pattern. It's as easy as that. Then you will sew whatever hand stitches you prefer for the design, or you can follow the ones that are indicated on the pattern. You will hand sew your beautiful design and then wash the stabilizer completely away. Let that dry, and then you will use your center embroidered square to build the rest of your mini quilt. So it's very, like, the most simple embroidery transfer method that there is. I actually have a cross stitch pattern that I've printed onto Stick and Stitch that I'm going to be working on, you know, on the flight to QuiltCon and all of those good things. So I wanted to show that to you because it's a great way to do kind of cheater cross stitch as well. So you can print your cross stitch pattern onto your Stick and Stitch, and then you don't have to do any counting. So it takes the counted out of counted cross stitch. So it's more like printed cross stitch. So this is a sheet of Stick and Stitch. The back has this paper backing. So when you peel the fabric-like side away, it reveals that sticky adhesive. And then you can stick this right to your fabric. So this is my little, I printed this right on my home printer. You want to make sure to print on that fabric-like side. So load this paper the right direction. And then it's a good idea too to set your printer for the draft setting or for the lowest ink setting, just so that you can see your pattern, of course, but you don't need to saturate it with a bunch of ink. You know, sometimes I forget to do that, and then you know, a tiny bit of my ink might run on the edge just a little bit, and I have to kind of wait for that to sort of dry so it doesn't transfer to my hand and transfer to the fabric. This doesn't happen a lot, but we really just recommend, since all printers are different, just like all sewing machines are different, we really recommend that you just put your printer on that draft setting. You really just, this is draft, and you can see it just fine. So at any rate, it's great for cross stitch, but also the hand embroidery pattern that we're going to be doing today. All right. Love the not counting part. Right? I kind of get lost when I'm doing cross stitch, and then I have to retrain my brain and say, wait, where was I again? What's happening? Especially if you're using some Aida cloth that has a very small count to it. So those cross stitches, you start crossing your eyes a little bit when you're trying to see what's going on. Yvonne says, I love the Sally Tomato handbag Ellen is showing on her wall today. And yes, it is the Casey bag. We did this last week in our Casey bag video cast. So if you missed that, you can still sign up for it at sewingonline.sulky.com, and you can watch the entire thing on demand. So be sure to grab that up if you haven't already. We still have kits available for the Casey bag, so head on over to sulky.com and grab yourself a kit. We have the burgundy version, and we have the gray version, which has the black faux leather. All right, so let's see. Oh, Karen says, wish I knew about that before I started a cross stitch pattern. I know. Grab up the Stick and Stitch. It is on sale. I think it's only about $10 for a pack of Stick and Stitch sheets. So that's a really great price if you want to try it out. I mean, you'll never go back. It's just the greatest transfer method. All right, so here is the Bloom Embroidered Mini Quilt. This is our free pattern right now. So if you go to sulky.com, you can search Bloom and you will find it. Or I linked directly to the free pattern in the description of today's post. So if you're not seeing that, be sure to click that little See More button. The whole description will pop out. You'll see all the links for everything I'm going to be talking about today, including the link for this free pattern, which again includes those hand embroidery templates that you will print on the Stick and Stitch, as well as the Bloom applique templates. And so nice, they are already mirror imaged. They're already flip-flopped for you so that when you do your applique and you cut it out and you transfer it onto your fusible web, when you fuse it to the right side, it will read properly and you don't even have to think about it. So there you go. So this is what it's going to look like when you head over to sulky.com to get the free pattern. You do have to add it to your cart and go through that sort of checkout process, but it will be completely free. And if you add some petites thread and the stick and stitch to your purchase, this embroidered mini quilt pattern will go to your Sulky account and you can retrieve it there and print it out, download it, save it to your computer, all of those good things. So it's designed by Aimee Davis of Daisy Eyes Handmade. So once you do all of your beautiful handwork, you will then assemble your mini quilt, and it really just looks like a large quilt block. So you've got your little corner pieces as well as your border pieces, and this is how large it is. This is the machine embroidery version that I'm going to be going over shortly, and I changed up the colors to match the fabrics I was using. So I deviated from the color chart. I know. I'm a sewing deviant. And, feel free to do that at any time. It does come with a color chart. Both the hand embroidery design and the machine embroidery design both have color charts. So these are the colors that are intended by the designer. If you want to deviate from that and match your fabrics, by all means, be your own designer, take ownership of it, make it your own. All right. And yes, Kathy says that's a lot bigger than I thought it was. It is. What are the finished dimensions? Because I cannot remember and I could eyeball it, but I want to be exact for you all. I know that center square measures 16 inches. So if we go 6, 12, it's about maybe 20 inches square when all is said and done. So it makes a really nice wall hanging. It would be great for your front door, instead of a wreath type of thing. Really just pretty for, and you know what? This size makes it really easy to turn this into a pillow. So you just take your square and add your backing fabric, and before you sew it shut, stuff it with some fiber fill, and you have a pretty pillow. So you can really, again, make this your own. And like I said, I'm going to be going over the machine embroidery instructions because really for handwork, once you have the stick and stitch transfer down, it's really just a matter of using that 12 weight cotton petites thread. That's what we use here at Sulky instead of traditional embroidery floss. The thread is so much easier to work with when it comes on a spool. Am I right? We also have blendable variety, which is these pretty randomly dyed colors of thread. And it's randomly dyed every 2.5 to 5 inches. So you don't get the same repeating pattern across your thread length. It's going to be all kinds of different and really pretty. And in the shades that match your fabric, you can choose one blendables spool for your whole embroidery, and it will look like you used a bunch of different colors. Or maybe you want to just use a blendable for your lettering, and then your flowers are all different colors. So totally up to you. But anyways, I digress. One strand of this is equal to 2 strands of traditional embroidery floss. So you're getting really great coverage without having to kind of deal with multiple strands throughout your handwork. So you can also use this for the quilting when your top is complete and you're quilting your quilt sandwich. You can use this pretty 12 weight thread as long as you have a big enough needle. So I have had success with a 90-14 needle, but we really suggest you go up to a 116 when you are especially quilting at like a higher speed. If you like to put your foot on the floor like I do, Another option for the quilting would be our 30 weight thread. This is also a cotton thread that also comes in blendables colors as well as solids. So you can really match your hand embroidery to your quilting thread really easily just by going to a little bit thinner thread for that 30 weight. And I use a 90-14 for the 30 weight every single time. All right, so on to the machine embroidery version. If you have questions about the handwork version, be sure to put them in the chat and in the comments, and I will address those momentarily. But we will move on. Oh, Mary says it's a nice size to be able to finish. That's another great point. You know, when we're making something that's kind of holiday specific or seasonal like this, we want to be able to finish it before the season changes again, right? So, you know, choose a smaller size. Make a mini quilt. Why not? It's doable. You can finish it in an afternoon, depending on what stitches and how intricate you want to get with your handwork. You could certainly do that entire hand embroidery design using back stitches and make everything kind of, you know, outline weight, and that would still be really pretty. So again, the bloom lettering is applique. So we're using Sulky Perfect Applique Fusible Web, which is a really lightweight, nice, high quality fusible web. If you haven't tried it, it's another thing you will never go back to that run-of-the-mill fusible web you find at the fabric store, because this stuff is so much better. Super easy to sew through. It doesn't make your fabric all crispy and weird. It is nice and lightweight, doesn't change the hand of your quilt. Super, super just fantastic to use. So for the bloom, it is raw edge applique as well, but you can certainly applique it on using your machine rather than using hand stitches, and choose a satin stitch, and then your raw edges would be concealed. But using that fusible web almost kind of like seals the edges of the raw edge applique, so you don't have a ton of fraying happening. So again, your choice how you want to applique it, but it is meant to be this raw edge applique look. And then you would add running stitches or back stitches just inside of your applique edges to kind of secure them and tie that into the rest of the handwork that's featured on the front of the mini quilt. Okay, so I'm going to move forward on the machine embroidery version. So we went ahead and digitized this beautiful design so that you can create the whole thing in the hoop of your embroidery machine. Now, as you can see by this picture, I am using the largest hoop that came with my machine. It's a 360 by 260 hoop. So if you don't have a hoop that's that large, we also have the design in 2 other sizes. So when you purchase the machine embroidery design, if you want to use the machine embroidery technique here, you will get it in 3 sizes. You'll get the large size that fits in the 16-inch square. You'll also get a size for a 9 by 10 hoop. You'll also get a size for a 5 by 7 hoop. So just know when you go down to 5 by 7, your design is going to be much, much smaller. So you might want to trim down that 16-inch square, because, I mean, your design is going to be, you know, in here. So you might want to trim down that square and add maybe another border of pretty fabrics, or you could just make a smaller sort of mug rug, use the same directions for the mini quilt, just alter the dimensions of your piecing, and then you'd have a little sort of mug rug or a smaller wall hanging that you can gift to someone, or obviously hang wherever you like. So just a note on the hoop sizes there, that when you do purchase the embroidery design, it will have the bloom applique. We're going to do that entirely in the hoop. It will have the beautiful blossom and grow lettering and all of those flowers. There are a lot of threads involved. It just comes out so nice, and you know, applique in the hoop is really the way to go if you are looking for professionally done applique with, you don't even have to think about it. All right, so here we have only the stabilizer in the hoop, as you can see. And the reason for that is because I used a pretty linen fabric, and I find when you're hooping a linen fabric that has kind of a more open weave to it than a cotton fabric, that sometimes when you hoop it, you get puckering because those open fibers kind of stretch along your inner hoop ring, even if you can't see it. And then when you pop your fabric out of the hoop, it wants to shrink back where it once was. Well, that's how we get those puckers. So to avoid that, I am doing hoopless embroidery here, where I only hoop the stabilizer and not the fabric. So here I have the stabilizer in the hoop, and then I spray the stabilizer and the back of my fabric with Sulky KK2000. So that double layer of sticky temporary spray adhesive, when those two things meet, they aren't going to go anywhere. And this is an air-soluble temporary spray adhesive, so it's just going to dissipate after about 24 to 48 hours. And I mean, you don't even have to do a basting in the hoop when you spray both the stabilizer and the back of your fabric. So here I have my linen fabric secured to the stabilizer and ready to go onto the hoop. And I just started with a fat quarter of fabric, and then I trimmed everything down once my embroidery was complete, and I'll show you that as well. All right, so you will put your fabric or your hoop onto your embroidery machine, and the first step of the design is that applique. So it's going to be the bloom letters, and it stitches out all of the letters as one design. So you don't have to do the B and then cut it out and then place your fabric and do the L and then cut it out and then so on and so forth. It's going to do the whole BLOOM, and it will do the placement stitches for your applique fabric. So we need to have our applique fabric ready so that when we need to place it onto the hooped fabric, we're ready to go. So this picture is showing you that I am applying the perfect applique fusible web to the wrong side of my applique fabric. And I used a press cloth here. You certainly don't have to, but sometimes I like to do that if I'm working with a smaller fabric piece. I really wanted to feature this cute floral print, and I didn't have a lot of it. So since I was working with a smaller piece, I just decided to use a press cloth, but that is certainly up to you as well. You really want to make sure when you're applying fusible web that you work in an up and down motion with your iron rather than swiping it back and forth. So that's really the difference between pressing and ironing. When we say press, we mean up and down with the iron until that fusible is adhered. All right, so here I have the design on my machine. You can see that my machine's telling me the 360 by 260 hoop is going to work out for me. And actually, I think the 360 by 200 would work, but I don't have that hoop. So I changed my hoop to the one that I had, made sure everything was loaded, and you could see it's going to do that bloom placement stitching first. So underneath, if you look really closely here and get your magnifying glass out, you could see, maybe I'll make this photo a little bit larger for you. You could see there's the M of the bloom fabric, and I have my fusible web on the back of that fabric because I'm actually going to fuse that applique after the embroidery is complete. And it's just going to give me more of a permanent bond throughout washings, wearings, all of those things. This, is kind of an optional step when you're doing in the hoop applique, but I just wanted the bond of that fusible web for just longevity purposes. And I didn't want sort of that applique fabric to look almost like puffy. Sometimes when you're doing in the hoop applique and you don't add fusibles, it's separate from the base fabric. So you get almost like a little bit of puffy look, if that makes any sense. All right, so I've done the placement stitches. Now I'm placing my floral applique fabric right on top of the hooped fabric, making sure to cover all of those placement stitches. And then I repeat that step to do the tacking stitches that tack my fabric, my applique fabric, to my base fabric. Then you want to either remove your hoop from the machine, or if you have a special function that, scoots your hoop toward you so that you can trim, you'll want to trim all those jump stitches, and then we're going to trim the fabric beyond the tacking stitches. So here you can see you want to get as close as you can to those tacking stitches without slicing through them. So a small embroidery scissors, or you can use my favorite little curved tip squeezers. These are at sulky.com. Really inexpensive and probably one of my favorite tools that there is. You can also use, of course, your applique scissors. We also have these at sulky.com. And you want to put that little duck bill on the, outer edge so that your applique excess fabric is going over that part of the scissors. And then you can get really close to those stitches. You could see these have a really nice sharp point to them. So you can even get into the corners of those letters really nice and easily. And you can see, the O, you're going to have to get in there and trim that fabric away from the inside of the O's. So you may need a combination of little curved tip squeezers as well as your duckbill applique scissors so that you can get in there and without piercing the fabric underneath as well. So once you have that all neat and nice and tidy, you could see me getting in there to the B as well. Small area of fabric that you need to remove. So make sure you have really pointy scissors so that you don't pierce that fabric underneath, and you can get nice and close to those tacking stitches. And if you get too close to those stitches and some of them pop out or get loose, it's okay. Just keep trimming. And then when you put your machine back on the hoop or get it back into stitching position, then you will sew your satin stitch to secure your applique edges. So here I have it back on the machine, all trimmed and ready for that next step, which are those satin stitches. So before the satin stitches, I almost forgot about fusing the applique. So another thing, if you happen to accidentally slice through a little bit of those stitches, we're going to fuse the applique in place before we do those satin stitches. So I went a little ahead of myself. Before you return your hoop to the machine, if you have one of those little mini irons, I have one behind me right here. That's great for this because you can fuse that while your fabric is still in the hoop. We don't want to remove anything from the hoop because we need those registration stitches, or we need the machine to remember where we were, right? And if we remove that from the hoop, craziness will ensue. So you want to fuse this while your fabric is still hooped. Then you'll put it on the machine again to do your satin stitches. So after those satin stitches are complete, I think it's handy to just give it a little light touch of a lint roller because you may have, from cutting and trimming and trying to get in all of those little nooks and crannies of each letter, you might have some fabric fuzzies around on the fabric. So just a little tip, have your lint roller handy. Make sure everything is neat and tidy before you continue on with the embroidery design. All right, so here you can see those stitches up close. And this is, I think, the last step of the design, one of those flowers. And again, I deviated from the color chart. It's really springy, great colors, but since I had this more muted color palette with these floral fabrics that I found in my stash, I just kind of grabbed one of the fabrics, took it over to my slimline container full of rayons, and just started picking colors to stitch my flowers with. And there it is, finished in a little bit better lighting. So you can see, you want to make sure that you're clipping all those jump threads with each thread change, because there's quite a bit of thread changes and you don't want those to get in the way of subsequent stitches. So when your embroidery is complete, give it a little press just to remove any kind of, wrinkles that you may have had from getting it out of the hoop, and just press it gently from the wrong side. And now we've got to square it up and do some trimming so that we can piece the rest of our quilt top. So all I did was measure it, and you could see my hooping was a little bit off. I didn't get the design right in the middle of that fat quarter. So I just measured everything, squared it off. Then I used my rotary cutter. I didn't do the rotary cutter before marking it with my chalk pencil. I've done that in the past because I think I can skip steps. And then I've got to cut everything down because I was off a little bit or something like that. So good idea to just mark off your final square. Make sure that your lettering is centered, that you've given yourself enough of a border, and then do your rotary cutting and trimming of your block. And then it's just a matter of following that free pattern and piecing your little squares on the corners and your long panel pieces on the sides and upper edge. There is my quilt top ready for sandwiching up with the batting and backing. Now you get to choose your quilting, whatever you would like to do. Oh, here we are preparing the batting for the quilt sandwich. Now, there are a few schools of thought about spray basting, and that is that spraying the batting, some folks feel that when you spray the batting, it absorbs too much of the spray adhesive. So then when you go to put your quilt top on the batting, it doesn't have that great of a hold. So you can either spray the back of your quilt top and then place that on the batting, or you could spray both like I did with the stabilizer, and then you'll have a really great strong bond for your quilting. Since this is only about a 20 or so inch square mini quilt, you can get away with spray basting and not even using a single pin if you want. If you also like to add some pins for safety's sake, or if you're going to be quilting this over the course of a few days because you want to add lots of quilting stitches and maybe you don't have a pocket of time, you'll want to add a few quilting pins just in case your spray adhesive decides to start dissipating, because like I said, it's an air-soluble temporary spray adhesive, and you want to make sure it's not going to go anywhere over the course of time. So at sulky.com, we have these really, really great wonder pins from Clover. They look like this, and they're so easy to use. You simply can pin through all of your quilt sandwich and then just press this down with your finger from the top side, and it's secure. These are so awesome. Let me know if you've ever used these before, because I'm kind of new to the Wonder Pin game, and man, they are awesome. All right, so you'll make your quilt sandwich, and then, like I said, you get to choose your quilting stitches. What I did was I simply quilted in the ditch of all of those piecing seams, and I left that center block totally free of any quilting stitches because I really wanted the embroidery to pop. but you might want to add more stitches, quilt along those borders. You can free motion quilt, do whatever you want to do to make this your own. Again, since it is a smaller scale mini quilt, you don't need a lot of quilting stitches to keep it together. So you can simply just quilt along those borders, along those seams, quilt in the ditch like I did, or add lots of pretty decorative stitches. Here I am quilting in the ditch. And then we get to add our pretty binding. So the reason I didn't have a lot of that applique fabric is because I wanted to use that applique fabric to bind the quilt as well. I think that's a really great technique if you have an applique quilt to feature that applique fabric along the border of your quilt, and it just really ties everything together so nicely. So here I have my binding is just clipped to my quilt sandwich using those great Clover Wonder clips, and I'm just stitching my binding in place. However you like to bind your quilt, you can follow the directions that you know and love. Some people first stitch their binding to the back of the quilt and then wrap it around the quilt sandwich and then sew it by machine along the front. Some people, I always add my binding to the front and then wrap it around to the back. So it's entirely up to you how you want to add your binding. And then I thought it would be fun to actually stitch my binding fold in place along the quilt front using a decorative stitch. So sometimes if you are binding by machine, which I almost always hand sew my binding to the back of the quilt. That's just how I was taught, and I've always done it that way. I find that when I try to machine sew the binding so that it catches along the back and still looks good on the front, I always mess it up somewhere. Somehow I get off track, and then I've got to rip out stitches and try to kind of match up, fill in the stitches that got off of the binding edge. So I thought, let's do a decorative stitch, and then we can sew the binding on by machine with a wider, pretty decorative stitch that is guaranteed to hit that binding fold as well as look good on the quilt front. So this is me just kind of looking at a few decorative stitches and kind of plotting out the one that I wanted to use. Now, who out there has really gotten great use of their decorative stitches on their sewing machine? I mean, my machine, I don't even know how many decorative stitches it has. It's probably in the hundreds. And I'm almost always using that straight stitch, the zigzag, the stretch stitch. I mean, those are my go-to stitches. So this is a great opportunity to look in your stitch library on your machine, pick a fun stitch that maybe you wouldn't have ever even used. Make sure to do some test stitch outs or test stitching so that you get a handle of how the needle and the machine are moving when it creates these decorative stitches. And then you can kind of anticipate that when you're sewing your binding on. So this is a cool flourish kind of a stitch. I ended up going with a stitch that was a couple of leaves. I'll show it to you close up in an image, but these are intersecting leaves, so it really goes with the theme of the quilt. I also experimented with a stitch that looked like a flower, and when I did my test stitch out, it almost looked like it was creating an eyelet, even though it was a loopy flower. I just didn't like the look of that along the binding. Plus, I thought if I veered off course a little bit along the quilt front, it would be more noticeable with that flower stitch because they were just stacked flowers. But the leaves, one leaf goes along one side of the straight stitch, the other along the other. And so I think it was just the perfect choice for the binding of this quilt. Here you can see me stitching that decorative stitch and how, one leaf goes on one side, the other on the other. And what a great idea. So I hope you all give that a go. Decorative bindings. And here is the finished machine embroidery version of the Bloom mini quilt. So there you have it, hanging nicely. So again, I'll show you the handwork version of the quilt. Whoops, that's not it. There we go. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see. And I like that this is showing it to you on a couch, because again, you can just add some stuffing to this and easily turn this into a pillow for your spring decor. So great free project from Sulky. Thank you, Sulky. We'll give some applause. Thank you, Aimee Davis, for designing this beautiful embroidery design and project for everyone. I'm going to go through the comments and make sure that I'm answering your questions. So if you do have questions about the handwork, about using 12-weight cotton petites for hand embroidery, about using the stick and stitch stabilizer, because again, that is on sale right now. You don't need a coupon code or anything. This sale will end on Monday, the 21st at midnight. So wait, 12 p.m. Pacific time. Sorry, not midnight. There you have it. It ends on the 21st. So take advantage of grabbing up those 12-weight cotton petites threads, as well as the stick and stitch stabilizer. And you can grab your free Bloom mini quilt pattern at any time at sulky.com. If you go for the machine embroidery design, that is a purchase digital design. But again, you're going to get it in 3 sizes. So you can choose the size based on the hoops that you have on hand. And then if you need to adjust the size of your center block so that it, so that it borders your design nicely, you can easily do that. Mine's getting a little wrinkled because I am taking it to QuiltCon. We'll see what everybody thinks about this as well at the Sulky booth. All right. Thank you, Esther. She says, perfect stitch choice. Oh, I wanted to mention our freebie for today. Everyone who's commenting, asking questions, liking, reacting, all of those good things to today's post, you are automatically eligible for our freebie today, which is a pack of Sulky Stick and Stitch. So somebody will win that, and you'll be able to try it out for yourself. All right, I have used a couple of the decorative stitches to finish my binding. It's fantastic. Gail says, I would love to utilize my decorative stitches. It's not top of mind for me for some reason, because I guess I just get sort of set in my ways and I'm always using that straight stitch for so many things. But there are lots of opportunities to use those pretty stitches and, to really show off all of those beautiful threads that we have. So this is just one of those ways. All right. Jennifer says she's used some decorative stitches in binding, but didn't look very good. It does take a lot of practice to sort of master those decorative stitches. So it's a good idea too, if you want to test out those stitches, make a little stitch sampler. So make a quilt sandwich with just some scrap fabric. Maybe you want it about 12 inches square or so, and just stitch lines of different decorative stitches. And then you can write on the fabric with a permanent marker or something like that. Mark on the fabric the stitch number or what it's called, and if you'd made any adjustments to the width or length of that stitch. And that way, when you go to do a decorative quilt binding, you can look at your stitch sampler hanging in the wall of your sewing room and say, okay, stitch 301 is going to look great, and I'm going to use this width and this length, and that'll be perfect. And then always still do a test stitch out, but then you'll have this reference, hanging in near your room or, tucked away that you can easily refer to. And that's a great idea too. Just one afternoon, if you want to get at your sewing machine, but you don't have a project that you're working on. I don't know who that is, but maybe that's you. And you have a pocket of time, create a little stitch sampler, and it's a fun exercise, and you get to see a lot of those stitches that you don't use, and then maybe you'll start using them a little more often. All right. Oh my gosh, Kathy says, I have a cute elephant decorative stitch that I use as much as I can. I would too. That's adorable, and I really want to see what it looks like. If you all haven't joined our Facebook group, it's called Sulky Stitch and Post, kind of like stick and stitch, stitch and post. On Facebook, you can join that group. It's a private group, and we all post pictures of our finished projects, in progress things. When we need help with something, we bounce ideas off of each other. I am in there checking in every single day as well. So if you have any questions for Sulky support staff, or you want to get to know each other, that's a really great place to do it. So join our Facebook group, Sulky Stitch and Post. And Kathy, I want to see that elephant decorative stitch. Pretty please. All right. Jennifer says, we don't use decorative stitches unless making clothes. I know, a lot of the times. It's also great for securing fusible appliques. Instead of a straight stitch or a satin stitch or even a zigzag stitch or a blanket stitch, you can experiment with different decorative stitches. Something like the Bloom applique would look really cute in a decorative stitch, and then you go mimic that decorative stitch along the binding, and you have this whole design element that you just added to your mini quilt. So, oh, tulip stitch. That would be a great one for this. So that's perfect. Tend to forget about my decorative stitches. I know. All right. Lots of people hand sewing the binding to the back of their quilts as well. So, all right. Hopefully I am, oh, where can you get the machine embroidery files? Thank you, Crystal. So the machine embroidery files for the Bloom machine embroidery design, those are at sulky.com. So I linked to those in the description of today's post. If you are not seeing that, then you'll need to click that little see more button on the description of today's video, and the whole description will pop out and you'll find the link and you can head right on over and grab it. It's one design at sulky.com, and with that purchase, you'll get those 3 sizes that I mentioned. I just hate when you have to buy a design and then you want a different size of it later, and maybe you don't have embroidery software. So then you got to go buy the design again. So we're just giving you 3 sizes. So hopefully everybody can make this with the hoops that they have on hand. All right. Betsy says this would be cute on a tote bag. Great idea. All right. I think that I am caught up on the questions, but if I did not get to your question today, you can always email us at info@sulky.com, or you can post your questions on our Sulky Stitch and Post Facebook group if you have joined that. All right. Oh no, Carlotta says my sewing machine is out for repairs. What to do? I hope you get it back soon. That's why I have multiple machines. So if one ever has to go anywhere, hopefully, I have another one that can sub in when needed. All right. Betsy, I know you got to get yourself on there. Go to the Stitch and Post. It's Stitch N Post. Sulky Stitch and Post, and just ask to be added. We'll add you right in, and you can join in the fun and the posting there. Esther says decorative stitches are great for binding hot pads. Yeah, I think a smaller project like this, it's much easier to kind of manage that decorative stitch binding. I don't know, if I was making like a king size quilt, I think I would definitely do my hand sewn binding on a larger scale project like that. But I don't know, once we use them more and more and we practice and practice, they just become second nature, just like that straight stitch. So it's really just a matter of practicing more and getting used to looking at those and, seeing what your options are for those stitches. Sharon says, I usually do hand stitching on binding, but like the idea of decorative stitches. So great. Something small like this, you know, something that's fun and quick and easy, you know, why not give it a try? All right. I am going to get myself ready to get on the plane and travel to QuiltCon. I will tell you all about it next Tuesday on another So What. So join me next week, and hopefully I have lots to share about what happens at QuiltCon. I'm excited to see people, and I'm excited to be at a show again. So I'll share everything that I find next Tuesday when I return on another So What. I hope you all download the free project today and that I have inspired you to sew something to get excited for spring. And we'll see you next week on another So What. Again, join our Facebook group. Email us at any time at info@sulky.com. And be sure to take advantage of this great sale. Grab up those cotton petites. Grab up the stick and stitch while you can get it for 25% off. And grab up that embroidery design. All right. Thank you all for saying have a great time and safe travels. I appreciate that so much. And I'll see you next week. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.